Hello, all you amazing survivor miracles and warriors in healing out there. I am here with the next journal exercise. It's going to include a few helpful things that I feel like are great foundational additions to the safe place that we talked about in the last video. And just go over a few helpful exercises basically. All right, so today what we're talking about is the meeting place. So kind of like the safe place, we're really focusing on, with this foundational system work, essentially creating places within our internal world, our internal system, that are being created a lot of times by the front, or a part that feels, capable of making these changes in the system. But essentially, we're visualizing places in the system to create common ground and a working place where everyone, all the parts involved, can see eye to eye, essentially. So my next recommendation to build on off of the safe place would be the meeting place. So when it comes to the meeting place, what I really want to stress is that, just like any of these places, is it needs to be something that feels comfortable to, the main part doing the healing work, as well as, as many parts in the system as possible. So you're going to put in any features that feel appropriate to you and your system. So for me, the main thing is always going to be two features for the meeting place, which is going to be tables and chairs, just essentially, and a room too. So, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a room. It could be a garden. It could be, on a foreign planet. It could be, in the clouds, whatever you want. Like, the meeting place needs to feel like, a really calm space, just like our safe space, essentially, because we want to be able to focus on just whatever is, the issue at hand. So the meeting place is a place that we're going to have what we would consider, our family meetings between the different parts of the system. So going on the car analogy before, it'd be all the parts that are co-conscious, all the parts that are in the car, the driver's seat, passenger seat, and if there are more in the back, and it would also be any parts that may be still riding in the camper, but feel maybe that they have some input or guidance, to add to the issue being discussed. So the meeting place basically is going to have a table, and that could be, low, it could be round, it could be, rectangular, it could be anything. Chairs, it could be comfy, squishy armchairs, inside of a library. It could be, it could be like stumps in a forest. It could be squishy, floor pillows or something, whatever it is, it's something that a space, and you can also choose to maybe grow it or shrink it depending on how many parts, need a place at the table, essentially, and little beautiful features too, to make it something that feels like you're taking time to really visualize. But essentially, you want these features there to create, a place for when you are having conflict within the system, and whether that's conflict for making a decision, or conflict because you have maybe intrusive PTSD symptoms because of triggers, or day-to-day, reality, trying to deal with it while having, maybe flashbacks or memories coming up. Or it might be big life events and big life decisions and stuff. These are all great, times when it's difficult for a singular person to kind of come to a decision. Sometimes it's that much more difficult for a multiple, and you can even use it for very little things too. So in my experience, I've really, struggled like a lot of survivors with clothing, so making decisions about clothing, something even minimal like that, which for me, back in the day, years ago when I was really early in healing, I would have panic attacks trying to get ready for the day, because, it really required a lot of compromise between parts, depending on what we were going to be doing throughout the day. to feel comfortable essentially in what we were choosing to wear and put on the body for that day. So, you know, having your place to where we can like really create acknowledgement and validation of all of the different parts, feelings involved will go a long way for, you know, resolving any sort of like internal conflicts you might be experiencing, just, you know, trying to live your life as a dissociative multiple, basically. So the main thing too with the table is like, if you don't have a preference, like doing something completely circular or whatever, I kind of always recommend having a like head of the table essentially. And this is mainly because just in a lot of discussions with multiple parties involved, it can be very beneficial to have a leader of the conversation or a mediator. Most of the time it's going to be, you know, the front, you know, the part that's, you know, just doing most of the therapy essentially, you know, the part that's usually working on the safe space the most, you know, that's going to be, you know, usually a protector, a leader in the system, maybe the front, you know, most often the front is involved in this, because that's why, you know, we're seeking help, is because we're struggling with the past and the way our brain has, you know, had to survive essentially, which is with all of these multiple parts and, you know, personalities essentially that get formed. So the leadership and or like mediation role, I think, is great to have. Just, and I have 2 chairs at the table and I'll get to that. So the mediator is great to have just basically because, like we had mentioned before with the safe space, like there's going to be like rules for this area that all of the parts that are there like need to behave in a productive manner. And if you do have parts that are being bullying or destructive or, you know, intimidating in one way or another, they do, you know, we do as fronts have to, you know, set those boundaries and ask them to, you know, step away from the table until they can communicate in a more productive manner. And a lot of this seems maybe impossible at first when you're dealing with more intrusive or destructive or problematic parts, you know, but really in my experience, you know, therapy, you know, and healing comes from being able to learn how to like manage, you know, those parts of ourselves that we really struggle with. And it really comes to, you know, treating them, like we said, like the bully on the playground, acknowledging that they're struggling and that they have pain, but they're behaving in a not great manner. And sometimes you're going to have to set that boundary over and over and over again until it starts sticking with the parts, because ultimately, like, we have to prove to our parts that we deserve to be the head of the table. We have to prove to our parts that we are essentially reparenting ourselves in the way that we need to be to heal, essentially. And a lot of that comes in, you know, protecting the, you know, the weaker parts, you know, and trying our best to, you know, set those boundaries within the system. So yeah, so rules for the table, having a mediator in place that's going to help, you know, make sure that the focus is there. And then also I have a second chair here, which can be either left empty or you can visualize, you know, something there, which I usually think, for me, all healing is most thoroughly grounded in spiritual practice, basically. And I reiterate, you know, for a lot of people, that for me, that's been Buddhism over the years now, like Jesus Cristo, you know, Jesus is my man. And like, that's who sits at the table with me, you know, now, and helps provide, you know, this place of like center and calm, essentially, and guidance, you know, with our, you know, with the highest good, with God, with the source of love and compassion and everything. So for me, sometimes perspective in any life event is very difficult until I try and bring in, the spiritual path, because that really is, in my experience, and for most survivors, kind of our North Star, our compass that does help us overcome many things that we would not be able to on our own. So, I guess some other features you might include for the table would be, maybe like a video screen, especially if you guys are discussing like intrusive memories and stuff like that, and you want to be able to like show stuff to other parts without necessarily, with having the control of like maybe slowing it down, making it black and white, turning off the sound, doing different things like that. We'll get a little bit more into actual memory spaces, but I do feel like TV screens, especially sometimes if you're trying to show a past part, like that it's the present, being able to show them, pull up memories of the current life to show them, on that screen can be great, and a grounding tool, also, having your journal out, essentially that's what this stuff is for, to like be taking note of what's going on here, so that it'll create further clarity and validation for all parts involved, and usually a lot of calm in the system because of that. So these are just like a few ways that I've kind of worked out over the years of just doing internal system work at the meeting place, and kind of really figuring out how to validate all parts involved, and really listen and know that we're including everything, and that we're going to be able to move forward in life with like less friction, and more as like a team with a common goal, essentially. So a lot of times productive or non-productive, behaviors or urges or feelings, once we can investigate them a little bit more, we'll get some insight and understanding that will make that part calmer and more validated, and us as a system just more able to meet their needs, and more, experience more cooperation. So here, these like first three are all just different ways of like essentially discussing like a topic with multiple parts that are here, and just like annotating it basically in your journal. So for me, for this would be like a pie chart, which would be, a circle with like your different little wedges, depending on how many parts you have. This is great if you have a lot of parts involved. If you have, a lot of parts, or just a few, this is a great one too, where you're just doing columns, where you just do your parts names, or however you refer to them here. And then you're gonna list, bullet, however you want, each part's viewpoints on the topic that's being discussed. And then here too is the same kind of idea with the Venn diagram. I would probably only recommend this if you were going between like 2 or 3 parts, and maybe make the circle a little bit bigger to where you have this center area. And with both of these and this one, you could use this center area if it's big enough, but with all of them, I usually make a separate box for compromise, basically, where once we're annotating everything that's going, recording in our journal, everything that's going on between the different parts at the meeting table, once we start realizing that there are different aspects of the issue that we can agree on, then one by one we can start listing, things that all the parts agree on, common goals, common aims, solutions essentially to the issue, in the compromise area. And then we can try and come to some sort of solution that will make the most sense for our current life and current reality. Because a lot of times the non-productive things are because we're really still stuck in a past mindset or mentality that we're projecting on our current situation. So this last one here is basically just if you have multiple parts with multiple viewpoints, like each part has multiple viewpoints on making like either a yes/no decision on an issue, a pro/con, on something, or just 2 different ways of going about like some decision in life. This is a great way of doing it too, just because then you have a little bit more room and organization for all of those different thoughts, essentially, to where you can have each part being able to list their, viewpoints on both directions, and then you essentially almost even come to a vote at the end, where you start seeing, where most parts have most of their feelings, essentially. I think that's most of it for the meeting place. If anyone has questions or clarifications, like always, I'm going to try my hardest to respond thoroughly in the comments. I'm a little wordy at times, actually, so sorry about that, guys. But the last two things I wanted to mention today were the safe room and rage room. So going back to the, I'm going to call them problem parts, but they're really just hurting parts. You know, the parts that are intrusive, are bullies, are giving us the more self-destructive, self-harm urges and stuff like that. We have to figure out a way in our healing to manage them. We never want to push ourselves too far or too hard, because realistically, if you are dealing with a mind control, ritual abuse type situation, you're dealing with perpetrators that very intentionally put these urges inside of you to self-destruct in case you started remembering. So because of that, we do want to work through them over the long term, but we also have to like go very, very, very slow in a way that, you know, is going to feel, you know, baby steps, like building that trust and communication in the system so that you get less of that backlash. But in my experience, having these other two places are great for those hurting parts that, you know, become very intrusive, especially when we're trying to do healing work. So that's the safe room and the rage room. So the safe room is essentially like a place for parts that are feeling like they're experiencing self-harm. In my experience, like it's something that you're gonna experience both, you know, like I mentioned, if the abusers wanted you to feel it, if you were remembering stuff, but also we have to acknowledge like those feelings are very normal. If it's a child in an overwhelming situation that seems like it's, you know, the pain is going to have no end, the thought of self-destruction seems very normal. So we have to understand that as we're dealing with these memories that are coming up, it's going to be unfortunately normal to be experiencing these emotions and feelings and stuff. Like it's, you know, we can choose not to heal and not deal with it essentially, but most survivors do still have that feeling a lot of times, you know, being triggered in day-to-day life, even we choose not to heal. And in my experience, it takes a lot of power away from those emotions and those sensations and those urges if we know where they're coming from and why they're there. So that's why I recommend, like, for like some people, if they're struggling a lot with that, internally having a safe room to almost like your internal hospital, you know, like psychological hospital, like a psych ward, essentially, like essentially a place that is kind of like the triage, but is more of what I would consider a long-term stay kind of thing, or as long as the part feels like they need to stay there. It's usually a place that, you know, really there's going to be a lot of effort in the system going into letting them acknowledge and express that pain in any way they can, metaphorically, visually, figuratively, within that room and that space, but not in physical reality, because we're not trying to cause any harm to ourselves or anything around us ever. So, you know, in the long term, that's so bad for everyone involved, you know. So really, you know, but sometimes having a place, you know, for us even, it's literally a padded room, something that acknowledges how fragile and hurt those parts are, basically, you know. And in my experience, that's like a great place to kind of create some acknowledgement. And it's a timeout, but it's a timeout with compassion, you know. Essentially, we really need to acknowledge the hurt. Also, in self-destruct, we might have like rage, you know, so wanting to be self-destructive and being reckless, you know, or addictions and a lot of that kind of stuff, you know. So with rage too, like having a rage room, so a room, a place that's 100% geared towards, you know, throwing weapons at targets, or smashing plates or glass, or, you know, like whatever you can think of, whatever that part needs. If you can't express something like that in your physical reality, like punching pillows or different stuff like that, but it's essentially like like customized timeout places for these parts that are really hurting, that, you know, we can just remind them that we're seeing their pain, we know how big and intense it is, and that, you know, this is how we're choosing to start dealing with things now, you know, and that we will acknowledge it. We are going to talk about it when it's done in a little bit more productive way in a communication. So I think that's pretty much everything I needed to go over today. I'm gonna do another video just designated at some point in dealing with these more self-destructive things. You know, it's something that you're dealing a lot with in mind control and ritual abuse. And when you can understand that it's like a mechanism of convincing us that those are the normal routes to take, we can start, you know, kind of convincing those parts of, you know, alternate ways of being that are actually much more productive in the long run and actually do, you know, protect us in a much, much better way. So sending my love and support and prayers to all of you on your healing journey, and I will post as soon as I can. And as always, just let me know if there's any clarifications I need to make. I'm still working on how to communicate all of this stuff like not a professional. So thank you all for joining me in my own journey and healing. So you have a great one. Bye.